Toronto Community Housing provides homes for 60,000 low and moderate income households. It has a $1.3 billion budget. Joining us is former City Councillor, Mayor, Member of Parliament, Cabinet Minister, and Senator Art Eggleton. Senator, thank you so much for joining us today.
A pleasure.
So, Toronto Community Housing Corporation has gone through a number of executive directors over the last few years. It's had a bit of a checkered past, I guess you can describe it. And Mayor Tory asked you to step in and take a look at how it's operating and going forward.
Right. Well, in fact, it's had a 30-year crisis in the making at Toronto Community Housing, starting with neglect and underinvestment by different levels of government, followed by the kind of turmoil we've seen over the last number of years. They had 4 CEOs in 5 years. The board, at one point under former Mayor Ford, got totally turfed out.
Right.
So a lot of turmoil. But the mayor asked me to head up a task force, 6 volunteer members of the task force that he appointed, and it took about a year. We spent the first half of the year looking at what was wrong with the way TCHC operated on a day-to-day basis, because we're getting lots of complaints from tenants. In fact, we met with over 1,000 of them in different public meetings and visits to different buildings.
So what was the number one complaint that these tenants had?
Well, the number one complaint was that they felt insecure. They didn't feel safe in many respects in the housing they lived in. I mean, TCHC has had enormous problems with criminal activity, with gangs and guns, and this kind of thing makes people, of course, feel quite insecure for themselves and for their families. But they were also concerned about maintenance of the buildings, infestation of bed bugs, and hoarding problems that led to fires and other infestation problems as well. They didn't feel that they were getting timely attention by the Toronto Community Housing staff. They felt that a lot of the little work that needed to be done by outside companies wasn't being done very properly in their units. So there was just complaint after complaint after complaint. We asked Toronto Community Housing to put together some action plans to try to deal with those matters. But that was just the first half. In the second half, we focused on the organization overall, its governance, its structure, and our final report we brought out in January. And to sum it up, we found that Toronto Community Housing Corporation was unsustainable.
Well, they have if I understand correctly, a $2 billion backlog on
well, that's
infrastructure.
Part of it. You see, it was unsustainable, certainly in a financial aspect, because they have a $2.6 billion backlog on repairs, on capital repairs that are vitally needed. They've only been able to get money for about a third of that, and that's come from the city. The federal and provincial governments, they've asked to cough up for another third each, but that hasn't happened so far, although things are looking brighter in that regard.
I understand that the new government during the campaign made a commitment to public housing, and presumably some of that money from the Infrastructure Investment Fund will find its way down to TCHC.
I certainly hope so. That's what I mean by things looking a little bit brighter. But there's more to it than that. TCHC is going to start bleeding red ink. Its expenses are higher than its revenue, going higher than its revenues. It has a very fixed revenue base. Most of the people in there are on rent geared to income and have very limited incomes, a lot of them on social assistance. So it's going to start bleeding a lot of red ink. But it's also unsustainable socially. It is too much of a concentration of poverty. Over 90% of the people in TCHC live below the poverty line. What we need is more mixed income.
So that raises a question about Regent Park redevelopment. And that's an attempt to basically level the old TCHC properties, bring in modern, new, mixed residential. How's that model working?
I think that's working fine. And I think we need more of that, and there are some other projects that are underway.
Lawrence Heights was
Lawrence
where
Heights, right? That's one of them that is just beginning, and Alexander Park.
Okay.
But there are only so many of those, but there's still lots of buildings. There's some 2,200 buildings. There's over 110,000 people live in TCHC. So there's a lot more that needs renewal, and that's where that $2.6 billion becomes vitally necessary, because if they don't get that money, they're going to have to close units. Close 7,500 units within the next few years. That's terrible, because we have a waiting list already of some 95,000 households who can't afford to close units and need to build more units, which is another thing that our task force report recommended, that more units need to be built. They need to be mixed income units, mixed being low income and moderate income people. That would help provide for a better revenue base for TCHC and help get them out of the red ink.
So what is the status of the report right now? Where does it sit?
Well, it's with the city staff, and the mayor put it on the agenda of the executive committee in early February, and then it was referred to the city manager and other staff, and they're processing it through. They are expected to come up with some interim report this spring and perhaps some final report on the way forward this fall.
Now, one of the things that's hampering TCHC has been its leadership. They've had 4 CEOs in the last 5 years. Have we seen the revolving door finally stop, and do we have the right person in that position?
Well, there isn't a person in that position other than an acting, it's an acting position at the moment. But it's time to bring some stability to the organization. We have recommended, though, that it become a community-based nonprofit as opposed to something that is totally controlled by city council. You see, they have a board of directors and they have city council, and the board has a difficulty exercising its fiduciary responsibility because it's got city council looking over its shoulder all the time. So we suggest to take it further from the political arena. That will help to stabilize and put the turmoil behind them and give them a fresh start.
Now, I did mention earlier about the new project at Regent Park. Have you had any indications how that's working out, how the community's reacting to it, and how it's maybe changed the thinking of TCHC from being a purely low and moderate income housing program?
Well, it's a marvelous development in that it does bring people together who have ownership in condominiums as well as people that are tenants in rental buildings. We need to get more of that kind of combination. In fact, low-income people, we want to try to encourage them to become owners as well. The other thing that Regent Park has done, aside from new buildings, it's opened up the streets, it's provided new amenities, new recreational facilities, a lovely big swimming pool, all sorts of things that are terrific for the area. So yes, I think it's a marvelous redevelopment of that property.
And the other area that you've also been working with, it's been getting a little bit more traction since the minister made some comments on it, is on a guaranteed income for Canadians.
Right. Well, I think we're at a stage where we need to do a pilot project to see if it would actually work, because what we're doing now isn't working very well. We have too many people living in poverty. We have a social welfare system that has enormous bureaucracy, enormous costs associated with it, and it's not solving the problem. People, at best, are maintained in poverty by the current social welfare system. At worst, they're trapped in it. It's hard for them to get out of it. So I think we need to find a new way, and I think testing the possibility of a basic income or a guaranteed annual income, as it's more traditionally known, is a good way to go forward.
Well, Senator, I'd like to have you back to discuss this in greater detail. I hope you'll be able to find some more time.
My pleasure.
Joining me was Senator Art Eggleton. We'll be right back in a moment.